Welcome to Business Live with me, Ian King. On this afternoon's programme, bank executives make a commitment to free speech following the resignation of NatWest Chief Executive Dame Alison Rose. Shares of Lloyd's banking group have fallen on the back of its half-year results. I've been speaking with its chief executive. Plus, a rise in profits at British American Tobacco thanks to higher cigarette prices and growing demand for alternative tobacco products. Good afternoon. This is Business Live with me, Ian King. The government says banking executives have made a commitment to free speech today in the wake of the row over Nigel Farage's bank account. This afternoon, the Information Commissioner wrote to the banks to remind them of their responsibility to the public. It comes after Dame Alison Rose stepped down as chief executive of NatWest Group after admitting she was the source of an inaccurate briefing to a journalist about the closure of Nigel Farage's bank account. She'd been in the job since November 2019. I'm joined now by our business correspondent, Paul Kelso. Paul, you've been speaking to the Information Commissioner. What's he told you?
Yes, the Information Commissioner's office has issued a statement this afternoon, Ian, following the events at NatWest in the last 12 hours have been really the pivotal ones, haven't they? Because it's received a complaint about NatWest conduct. It doesn't say it's from Nigel Farage, but I think we can assume it is, specifically around the potential divulging of his personal information to the BBC's business editor, Simon Jack, in that conversation at a charity do a couple of weeks ago that has ultimately cost Alison Rose her job. Now, it's not a formal investigation yet, but the Deputy Commissioner told me they've begun the process of trying to examine exactly what's happened here. Let's hear from him.
We have a very strict process we follow for all circumstances that we get involved with. The first stage of that is we encourage the individuals and organisations to try and resolve things between each other. If that doesn't work, then we start getting involved, collect the right information and take that forward as a formal investigation. So we're at that stage where that's happening. We haven't yet formally begun an investigation, but obviously we're very interested and pay attention when there are concerns raised on any issue out there.
Paul, in the meantime, Nigel Farage told Sky News this morning he wanted the entire NatWest board to resign because it initially stood behind Alison Rose this time yesterday. He thinks they should all go. Do you think that's going to gain any traction?
It feels doubtful. He's got a pretty good record. He's currently got more apologies out of banks and the BBC than he has bank accounts, and he's also got one very senior scalp here. But it might stop there. Alison Rose lost her job effectively because the Prime Minister and the Chancellor let it be known they were not satisfied with her conduct last night, and that was the domino that toppled that forced her to resign. The board had taken the position, the pretty narrow grounds to try and hang on to her. How Dave's very keen to hang on to her. I asked the City Minister, Andrew Griffith, directly that question this morning. He said no. He's already resigning. The chairman is already standing down next year. So they stopped short. Not least, one imagines, the taxpayer owns only 40% of NatWest, doesn't want to put it in a position where it's even more perilous with both chief executive and chairman's seats empty. So it may well stop there, despite Mr Farage's attempts, doubtless, to keep this going. Very interesting position NatWest finds itself in. It's had to apologise several times. It's obviously lost its chief executive, the most high-profile woman in British business. It's apologised twice, but not for the central issue here. It has not apologised for wanting to remove Mr Farage's Coutts account. Essentially, it's standing by its argument that was still a commercial decision, albeit one driven by his values clashing with their own. Its problems, it still thinks, were about the process and about the language that was used about Mr Farage. It's sticking to its guns, essentially, at heart here, that Mr Farage can't have a Coutts account, but he can have a NatWest account. When I asked him if he's taken up that offer yesterday, he said he hadn't, because they haven't offered him a business account. It takes quite a stretch to imagine a world in which he does bank with NatWest, but you never know.
OK, Paul, thanks for that. And if you have a look at our digital platforms, there'll be a piece by me reflecting on Alison Rose's career at NatWest in the very near future. It may already be up, actually. Now, some other stories for you. Amazon has offered to make changes to how it ensure its third-party sellers on its marketplace are treated fairly, following an investigation from the Competition and Markets Authority. Amazon says it will also change how it uses businesses' data after the CMA launched an investigation into whether the online retailer had been giving its own brands an unfair advantage. Heathrow Airport said today it is still not back to pre-pandemic traffic levels. The UK's biggest airport said this morning that some 37 million passengers used it during the first 6 months of the year. That was up from 26 million during the same period last year, but just shy of the record of 38.8 million passengers that it hosted during the first 6 months of 2019. Heathrow did, however, say that the first half of the year had seen it experience some of the busiest days on record. The airport, which has net debt of £14.7 billion, reported a pre-tax loss of £139 million for the period. That was down from £321 million in the same period last year. Higher interest rates across Europe have helped the Spanish banking giant Santander to report a pre-tax profit of €8.1 billion for the first 6 months of the year. That was up 2.2% on the same period as last year, with the overall performance dragged down by higher provisions against loans it does not now expect to be fully repaid. In the UK, where Santander is the third largest mortgage lender, the bank reported a pre-tax profit of £1.2 billion for the period. That was up 18% on a year ago. Santander UK set aside £148 million during the period to cover doubtful loans. Now, shares of Lloyd's banking group have fallen today after its half-year profits came in slightly below expectations. The bank, which owns the UK's biggest mortgage lender, Halifax, and which is also the biggest player in the UK current account market, reported a pre-tax profit of £3.87 billion for the first 6 months of the year. That was up 23% on the same period last year. But investors were worried that the net interest margin, that's the difference between what a bank charges borrowers and pays depositors in April to June, was lower than it was from January to March. I've been speaking with the bank's chief executive, Charlie Nunn.
So we've had a very dynamic environment, as you know, and we've had challenges for a lot of our customers. On our mortgage business, we've had a few things that have happened in the first half. The first is actually we did a sale of some of our legacy mortgage positions, which we thought was the right thing, obviously, for those customers, for our shareholders, and we sold about £2.5–3 billion of our legacy mortgage positions. We've had very strong demand from our existing customers to want to remortgage with us, and that's been very important for us. And then on the open book, we've seen actually the whole market has been down a bit and has been very competitive, and so we've been supporting customers as they've been dealing with higher interest rates. So a really dynamic mortgage market. The focus for us has been those customers that are moving from a lower rate to a higher rate and making sure they've had the support they need.
Your net interest margin is up from 2.77% to 3.18%. There's obviously a live debate going on about pass-through of higher interest rates to savers. Do you worry that that increase in your net interest margin is going to reactivate that debate?
Well, actually, what we're seeing on Q2 versus Q1 is our net interest margin and net interest has fallen. It came down from 322 basis points in Q1 down to 314 basis points. And that's for two reasons. One is we've got very tight margins on our mortgage business. So our customers are dealing with much higher interest rates, and we're very aware of that. But actually, our mortgage margins are down to about 50 basis points. And historically, that's been more like 150 to 200 basis points. So customers are not getting that additional 100 to 150 basis points on mortgages. And then the second reason is just that discussion we're having on deposits and savings. A stronger pass-through around our saving customers, and more customers looking at where they need their liquidity for everyday spending versus money they can put away to get a better rate of return. So that shift is what we guided to in the last 2 quarters. We expect that to continue to happen, and we're doing very proactive outreach to mortgage customers and to savers to make sure they've got their money in the right savings pot, or they are taking advantage of the right mortgage deal.
Now, impairments during the period rose from £377 million to £662 million. What sort of assessment about the business climate sits behind that provision?
Yeah, so the impairments progression has a bit of noise in it. We make adjustments under the accounting standards for our looking forward at the economic scenarios we have in place, and we actually increased our provisions given that we think the economy is going to be a bit slower and unemployment a bit higher in 2025 than we had previously assumed. if you strip that out, what we're seeing is actually very strong or really resilient customers and credit performance on our different businesses and different portfolios that we manage. We talk about the quality ratio, the AQR. It's about 30 basis points is what we've been guiding to, and actually that's been very consistent through this period. And when you look at our portfolios, mortgage arrears have remained very, very low and below pre-COVID levels. Our consumer lending businesses around cards and loans continue to perform, again, very strongly and are at levels of performance which are better than pre-COVID levels. And the same is true on our commercial and small business books. Where do we see the areas that customers are struggling? It's in a few areas. There's a few of our legacy mortgage customers who have a lower income and are struggling more with the increase in their payments around higher rates for mortgages. And we've got very targeted focus on those. It's a very small percentage of our customer base, but they're important. And in our business customers, the SME book, there's a few sectors that are showing and dealing with some very complex issues, specifically agriculture, transport and hospitality. And some of the businesses in those segments we're seeing their cash flows weaken, and we're really trying to put support to provide financial services support to them as well. And so those are the kind of target areas that we're focused on.
That was Charlie Nunn from Lloyd's Bank speaking to me a little earlier. Now, raising the price of traditional cigarettes and growing demand for alternative tobacco products has helped British American Tobacco to a sharp rise in half-year profits. With cigarette use in decline, the company's been focusing more on vaping and heated tobacco products. Well, pre-tax profits for the 6 months to the end of June came in at £5.3 billion. That was up 73% on the same period last year and was despite BAT, whose brands include Dunhill, Rothmans and Lucky Strike, selling 286 billion fewer individual cigarettes during the period. The group's vaping brand Views grew sales by 35.5% during the period. Who are joining me now is Kingsley Wheaton. He's Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at British American Tobacco. Kingsley, welcome to you. Give me an idea of the kind of price increases you've been pushing through on traditional cigarettes.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. It's good to see you again. I mean, we've traditionally had a model where the volumetric decline in cigarettes is something we've been able to offset with pricing to ensure that the revenue curve of combustibles moves on. That's all important for us because it helps fund our new categories expansion. Obviously, a very large proportion of cigarette pricing around the world is excise. So if you look at the pricing we've pushed through, you would actually find around the world that's generally somewhere around low single digit, well below inflation, because obviously that's our price increase. That's helped drive new categories up in terms of cross-funding there by 27% in the first half. We're very pleased with that result. Nearly one sixth of what BAT sells in terms of revenue is in non-combustible products, i.e. not in cigarette products.
But one thing that really jumped out at me, Kingsley, I mean, traditional cigarette volumes down 5.7% overall. They were down by 12% in the US. Why is the US retreating from traditional smoking that much more rapidly than other markets?
There's been a number of reasons in the US. You know, it has been a choppy environment through 2022. That's got to do with the macroeconomic environment, consumer confidence, inflation, spending. However, we've put in place a lot of commercial plans to deal with that at the back half of last year. We've started to see the early green shoots of growth for our combustible business in the US. Our premium share is up 100 basis points from January to June. Our market share is up 60 basis points on the back of Newport and NAS. And at the same time, we've had a tremendous performance from Views, which revenue is up 22% in the US. We're now leaders in 35 states across the United States. And we are very much the clear market leader with about 45% value share. So the transformation of the business is also driving combustible volumes down as consumers trade into vapor. We also have illegal modern disposable vaping products in the USA, which are also hurting combustible consumption. So we're very, very keen to get better enforcement and better regulation around those products in order that there's a level playing field for everybody.
Well, you mentioned Views there. Is it possible to say what proportion of Views' sales come from single-use disposable vapes?
It's a fairly small percentage at the moment. The lion's share of our business is still in rechargeable pod systems, Views Alto in the US, ePod 2 in the rest of the world. It is something that's really important to us. We actually would favour more stringent regulation. More regulation. We think there's an awful lot that can be done, We don't think it's the sales of these products that are the problem, because they offer people the chance to switch for those that otherwise would have smoked. We think it's the irresponsible marketing of these products, and measures like restriction on flavours, packaging and labelling, youth access prevention at retail, possibly facial recognition, even as far as retail licensing, is something that we would be very keen to discuss with government, regulators and policyholders.
You mentioned flavouring there. In the EU, they're about to ban flavoured heated tobacco products. Is that going to impact you greatly?
Well, it's coming up on October the 23rd. We're ready for that. We've had plenty of time to prepare for that. We actually think that it's erroneous policy making and regulation, because consumers need those flavours in terms of the satisfaction to make the move. Now, in Europe, by far and away, the biggest category we have is vaping, where flavours will be preserved. At least on tobacco heating, the playing field will be level, so everybody will be able to have tobacco-only products and variants. So I think we'll manage our way through it, and I don't believe that that's going to dent our growth credentials in Europe from our new categories portfolio.
OK, Kingsley, we've got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Good to catch up with you today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Good to see you.
Still to come here on Business Live, we'll have a look at how the markets have finished up this Wednesday afternoon. Don't go away.
Bluntly, this is the new normal. We need to learn to adapt to these higher temperatures. But what's really critical, and what the World Weather Attribution scientists have shown us this morning, is that although this is going to get more frequent, this sort of intense and very hot heat wave, actually it will keep getting worse as we keep emitting greenhouse gases. So if we reduce our greenhouse gases very rapidly, then we can avoid this getting very, very much worse, and to the point where it's much harder to adapt to. And a lot of people say, well, look at 1976, you know, one of the hottest summers we've ever experienced in the UK. But the difference about 1976, or when your viewer was going on holiday in the 80s, is that that was really unusual then. Back in 1976, the temperatures in the UK were a hotspot, and the rest of the world was quite normal. But even then, we saw excess deaths rise by about 30%. It doesn't heat equally, because already some parts of the planet are already hotter than other parts of the planet. Some parts react differently. For example, in the Arctic, actually it's warming 3 to 4 times faster than other parts of the world. And in some of that is because of the melting ice. That melting ice, that melting snow, that would normally reflect more of the heat. And so as there is more dark ocean where there is not ice, it absorbs more heat. And so the region heats faster. So different parts of the planet heat at different rate. Sea temperatures are frighteningly high this year. They have
in the Mediterranean.
Particularly around the Mediterranean and around the UK. We had a marine heat wave around the waters of the UK just a few months ago, 4 to 5 degrees higher than normal temperatures, I think. That's incredibly dangerous for the wildlife in the oceans, but it also, hotter sea temperatures add to the heat we've already put into the atmosphere, and add to the heat that we're experiencing.
Fly Emirates. Fly better. Fly Emirates. Fly better. Thank you.
Well, equities in Europe have finished to the downside this afternoon, with investors largely sitting on the sidelines ahead of tonight's interest rate decision from the US Federal Reserve. All of the main continental European indices more or less in negative territory. One of the main talking points is the luxury goods group LVMH, France's biggest company. It fell by 5% as it pointed to a slowdown in growth. That's knocked 44 points off the CAC 40, which finished down 103 points. Here in London, the FTSE 100 has also finished in negative territory, nearly a fifth of 1% there. Some of the mining heavyweights weighing on the index. NatWest, the biggest blue chip faller, partly in response to the departure of the well-regarded Dame Alison Rose, but also in sympathy with Lloyd. So say the miners are all lower after disappointing results from Rio Tinto. Half-year profits fell by 25%, which was its weakest performance in 3 years. To the upside, the leading blue chip gainer was Rolls-Royce, which was ahead by 22% at one point today after a big upward revision to its earnings forecast for the year. Going into the close, Ocado surged by 20%, although it's got to be said such wild movements are not particularly unusual for that stock. Outside the FTSE, RHI Magnesita finished up by nearly 7%, following a trading update from the refractory product specialist. We've had the CEO of that company on the programme in the recent past. Wall Street's been mixed since the open. The big tech reporting season has got underway. Microsoft currently down by some 3% after unveiling a heavy investment programme related to AI, but Alphabet, the owner of Google, up by nearly 6% right now after its second quarter profits came in ahead of expectations last night. On the foreign exchange markets, well, again, it's all pretty quiet ahead of the Fed's decision tonight. Sterling up 0.25% against the US dollar, unchanged against the euro. As for the oil price, well, that has come off the boil this afternoon after 4 straight days of gains. A barrel of Brent crude currently changing hands at $83.48 a barrel. That's down a little over 1/6%. Well, joining me this afternoon is Patrick Farrell, Chief Investment Officer at Charles Stanley. Patrick, great to see you. Obviously all about the Fed this evening. Are you expecting a quarter-point rate hike?
Yes, I think, Ian, we will see a quarter-point rate hike from the Fed. And I think there'll be some commentary in relation to the better inflation numbers that they have received. So they'd be foolish not to sort of comment on that. However, I think Powell will be very, very careful in his commentary just to make sure that the markets don't see that as an optimistic view, that they still very much have work to do. And, you know, some of the services inflation that we're seeing still in the US is still too high for the Fed, I think.
Now, what about some of these tech results, Patrick? I mean, Microsoft, it looked like the stock was pretty well priced for further growth, so no surprise to see a bit of disappointment there. But Alphabet, really quite a pleasant surprise on the upside.
Well, I think there was a little bit of a whisper in relation to some of the advertising revenue that's been a little bit of a question mark for some of the other sort of tech companies. But Alphabet did come out and say, look, their Google search and their YouTube was actually a really good result. So I think, you know, from an advertising perspective, a lot of analysts potentially were sort of thinking maybe there is some weakness that they need to be aware of, but it didn't come through the results.
Now, Patrick, before I let you go, what about a reflection on Dame Alison Rose's time at NatWest? Do you think the history books will be quite kind to her longer term?
Oh, look, I think so. It's very difficult from a situation to sort of reach all the way to the top of the CEO position. So, you know, you can't necessarily know everything that's going on in terms of some of the smaller businesses, but unfortunately that comes with the top job. And I do think she's got a great reputation. And I think, you know, that's not necessarily going to be scarred. But unfortunately, the buck stops with the CEO in a lot of situations like this.
Indeed, it does. Patrick, always good to see you. Thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks very much, Ian. Cheers.
Well, that's it from me. I'm back again with Business Live tomorrow morning at 11:30. In the meantime, if you get a chance, I have been writing about the departure of Dame Alison Rose from the Chief Executive's position at NatWest, what it means for the bank going forward and indeed for her legacy. She's been on this programme many times over the years and it was always very interesting speaking to her. Join me tomorrow at 11:30. Next up, it's Mark Austin. Cheerio.